So as far as the symposium is concerned, I was first of all impressed by the international breadth of the symposium, the fact that we had students coming from different corners of the world, from Japan, from Germany, from the United States, from Lebanon. And so it really brought a very unique kind of mix. And this is not as common, I think, for graduate student symposiums. Usually graduate student symposiums tend to be relatively localized. So I think that was one of the strengths. I think it was extremely beneficial for students from different parts of the world to hear the kind of research that's going on and the orientations methodologically, intellectually that people bring to their subject matter. The quality of the papers was very high, and also the range of the subjects that were addressed were also quite enriching, I think, for those who attended. We had talks on Futuwa in Ibn Arabi, quantum physics in Ibn Arabi, Sufi ethics, the Sama ceremony. There were a lot of very high quality papers on the history of Sufism in Turkey, much of which I myself was unfamiliar with and I was quite impressed by. So that was another aspect of the symposium that was impressive. And also, I would say, the interesting intersection that I felt between what in religious studies we tend to call theology and the academic study of religion. We saw people who were using the methods in the social sciences to study Sufism, but there was a kind of a religious sensitivity that was brought to the subject matter that you usually find in theological circles that, in my opinion, really enriched the analysis of the subjects. And it was also very unique, because usually in the theological circles where you have a religious sensitivity, you don't have as much of a use of the academic methods that you find in the social sciences, especially in Western universities. And in Western universities, in the social sciences, sometimes the religious sensibility is completely lacking. So it was an interesting interface between these two methodological orientations coming together, and I thought that also enriched the symposium very much. So to the credit of Jamal Noor Hoja, I thought it was very successful at many different levels.
You presented a paper which is used very meticulous methodological way, as I can see. How do you interpret on this? I mean, how do you see your paper in the perspective of this methodology issue?
Mm-hmm. Well, my paper was on near-death experiences from the vantage point of Sufi metaphysics in Ibn Arabi. And as I pointed out when I presented the paper, it was somewhat, I felt, of an unconventional subject perhaps to be addressing at a Sufi conference. But in retrospect, maybe not, because there were a lot of very unique papers presented at the conference. The near-death experience, or the subject of the near-death experience, is something that fascinated me ever since I read Betty Eadie's Embraced by the Light, a personal memoir, an autobiographical memoir of a near-death experience that she had, and that was published and became a bestseller in the United States. I happened to have been studying Ibn Arabi at the same time. I was a graduate student when I read that book, and I was blown away by the uncanny intersections between what she had described of what she had seen in her near-death experience and what Ibn Arabi describes of the topography of the afterlife. And so that it blew me away. And I was quite pleased to learn. I thought I was maybe the only person working in Sufi studies that knew about the book and that had been blown away by the book. But then I was extremely surprised to learn that Jamal Noor Hoja actually had read the book and liked it so much that she encouraged her students to read the book. So there was already something of a receptivity in the audience, I think, to that subject matter. But the reason I thought that it would be useful to present a topic on that subject, because there has been, to my understanding, no research done on trying to understand the near-death experience from an Islamic theological vantage point. There are a lot of studies on the near-death experience in psychology. There are a lot of studies of the near-death experience taking place in neuroscience, in medicine, in nursing, but not a lot of research going on near-death experiences in the field of religious studies or the secular discipline of religious studies, and to my knowledge, next to nothing taking place in Islamic intellectual circles. So I tried to understand the near-death experience from the vantage point of Akbarian metaphysics or Ibn Arabi's philosophy, and I think Ibn Arabi's philosophy provides us with a framework through which we can actually understand what's happening in a way that does justice to the near-death experience itself, or what people claim to be experiencing, but also in a way that's true to the teachings of Ibn Arabi. And so Ibn Arabi seems to provide us something of an Islamic framework or perspective or a worldview or a lens through which we can appreciate the near-death experience, understand the near-death experience in all of its facets and from all points of view. And I think the paper was, I mean, people had come and talked to me. I think some people were quite pleased by the paper and the approach that it had taken. But like I said, it was something of an unconventional paper. It was not the kind of paper that I probably would have presented at a normal academic conference in Canada or the United States or Europe in religious studies. And it's not really the kind of subject that you can easily address to a Muslim community as well, or like a theological community or a mosque community. So this seemed the only place where I could be creative and try to bring the two together in a way that I wouldn't encounter resistance, in which there would be a kind of open-minded approach to understanding what might be happening here.
So you see this you know, part of the symposium is the speciality of it. I mean, that makes it special.
Oh yes, interdisciplinary, definitely. And I've noticed that also about the institute as well, the Sufi Studies Institute that Jamal Noor Hoja has created. It's an interdisciplinary institute, and this allows for people to explore ideas that they wouldn't really have an opportunity to explore in conventional religious studies departments or within the parameters of most disciplines. So if you're going to approach some of these subjects within, let's say, a physics department, physicists are not going to be that interested in trying to understand what Ibn Arabi is saying in a physics department. And in a religious studies department, the religious studies people might say, well, this is physics. You're not really in a position to be exploring physics in depth in a religious studies department. So you need an interdisciplinary program that can allow you to approach these subjects from the vantage points that they're being explored from here at the Institute. And I've been also really impressed by the students at this institute, people from all backgrounds, molecular biologists, physicians, literary theorists, all studying different aspects of Sufism. So I think there's a lot of cutting edge work that's taking place here, and I really hope it becomes something of a model that other institutions can use for the study of Sufism, for the study of religion, for the study of mysticism in the future. The only one that I know of that approaches a similar, or uses a similar approach, might be the Institute of Transpersonal Studies in the United States, headed by Robert Frager, but I don't know of too many institutes, globally speaking, that are doing what Jamal Noor is having done here at this institute.
Thank you very much. So we can move to China.
Oh yes, yes. So,
maybe you can start.
Sure, I was a visiting professor there 2 years ago, and it was a wonderful experience for me. The first time I'd been to China, I was struck by the level of interest in the students when I was there, both from Han students who are not Muslim, Chinese students, and also from the different Muslim communities. They weren't getting credit for the instruction that I was giving, the lectures that I was giving, but yet they would still come on a regular basis. And it was at Peking University, which is the leading university in the country, so there were some very, very bright, intelligent students. And the Han students, who didn't know much about Islam, were nevertheless very astute in their perception and their understanding of the subject matter that was being addressed. They would ask very perceptive questions. The Hui students, some of them, I was quite impressed by their knowledge of Islam, even their proficiency of Arabic. They were bringing up sometimes texts that I have not even heard of. One time I had given a lecture one evening, and this very bright and learned Hui student began to ask me about specific aspects of a text in Ghazali that I wasn't even aware of. So I was quite taken aback by the depth of the knowledge of some of the Hui students in China. So it was overall a very positive experience for me, and I think for the students as well. I also taught Arabic calligraphy when I was there on the side, and Arabic on the side, and there was quite a bit of interest in the Chinese students in learning Arabic. So I was doing more than just teaching Sufism and Islamic philosophy, but there was a language component that I brought in that I think was also very well received, because the Chinese have a tradition of calligraphy. You might say the two richest traditions of calligraphy in the world are the Chinese calligraphic traditions and the Arabic calligraphic traditions, but the style of calligraphy is very different. But I think the Chinese students were quite appreciative of this different form of calligraphy that we were learning in China. So yes, overall it was a very positive experience in China.
And what would be the contributions of this professorship in Peking University? I'm going to move forward to the professorship.
Yes, yes. Well, I think you know, we're living in a globalized world in which communities are no longer isolated, and we cannot afford to be ignorant of the perspectives, the religious beliefs, the traditions of other cultures, of other civilizations. And because these different communities are coming together, it's really essential that the various cultures and civilizations learn about each other. And the Chinese civilization is one of the richest, most powerful civilizations in human history, and the Islamic civilization is one of the most powerful civilizations in human history. And so I think it was extremely beneficial for the Chinese students to have this exposure to learn about a neighbor of theirs, the ideas, the beliefs of Muslims, the history of Muslims. And so in that respect, I think it's contributing to foster, in its own little way, more harmonious relations between people of different cultural communities. You know, Samuel Huntington had his famous clash of civilizations hypothesis. And I'm not really in a position to comment much about that particular theory. It's been debated. Edward Said wrote an extensive critique of that hypothesis. But one way that we can work to alleviate the travesty of some of his predictions from coming true is by contributing to programs such as the one that this chair this chair had in mind, by creating understanding, better appreciation of different cultures, different religious beliefs. So in that respect, I think that was one of the aims of this chair, and I think it's been successful in achieving that.
We were in China for a conference 4 years ago or something, and during that time, Professor Duwayne told us the importance of this chair is to connect Chinese tradition, China, with his own tradition, Sufi tradition actually. So what do you think about this idea? I mean, how do this chair help China to connect its own Sufi tradition?
You mean how it can help the Chinese connect with their own Sufi tradition, or how it can help?
The role of this chair,
yes,
to help Chinese culture, contemporary Chinese culture, political culture, everything, to make connections with
the Islamic
and Chinese Sufi culture.
Yes. Well, one of the things about the chair is that the focus of the chair was on culture, and with a special interest in promoting the study of Sufism. And if there's any sub-tradition in Islam which has the capacity to build bridges with other cultures and other communities, it's the Sufi tradition. Not only because of the Sufi virtues of love and of compassion and harmony that make it easier for communities to live side by side, but also because of the worldview itself. The Sufi worldview is something that in some of its more fundamental respects finds analogs in other mystical traditions, spiritual traditions. Toshihiko Izutsu wrote a book called Sufism and Taoism. Tu Weiming and I had a conversation, and he had told me how he'd actually helped Professor Izutsu in the writing of the book. He had pointed out certain errors in the book while Professor Izutsu was writing the book. And so Izutsu, what he looked at were some of the philosophical intersections between Sufi metaphysics and Chinese Taoist philosophy, because in China there are three indigenous traditions, or three traditions that are considered to be relatively indigenous. There's Confucianism, there's Taoism, and Buddhism. Buddhism was originally in India, but it was Sinicized, or integrated into Chinese culture. And so the Chinese tend to see these three traditions as indigenous to themselves. Now, Sufism has a very long history in China. Chinese Sufism is not really perceived to be as indigenous. This was my impression, my interactions with the people that I met, that it's not perceived to be as indigenous to China as, let's say, Buddhism is, even though they're both foreign, their origins are foreign to China. But Chinese Sufi metaphysics overlaps in many respects with Taoist metaphysics, certain aspects of Buddhist metaphysics. So it creates the possibility for a philosophical conversation. And where intellectuals in China can see that Islam is not as alien as you might think it is. In some respects, there are aspects of Islam, such as certain aspects of the Sharia, which are particular to the Islamic world, which might seem alien to the Chinese. But in its philosophical and Sufi formulations, there's a lot that the Chinese can see that's similar to their own. And I think if there was any chair that was going to be established to help Chinese-Islamic relations, it would have to have been a chair in Sufism, or Sufi studies, or Sufi thought. So I think in that respect, the chair was successful in achieving some of the aims that it was meant to achieve.